Flavours is co-director of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, a project of Stanford Medicine. The Prevention Toolkit offers theory-based and evidence-informed resources created by educators, parents, and researchers aimed at preventing middle and high school students' use of e-cigarettes, tobacco, and nicotine. Richard holds a BA in Integrative Biology from UC Berkeley, and he has a strong interest in empowering people's lives through science. Prior to joining the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, he worked at UCSF as a clinical research coordinator and led a novel study on vaping in adolescents. As co-director, he hopes to utilize his professional skills and passion for education to ensure that the toolkit's materials are accessible and the most up-to-date for parents, educators, and community members. So please join me in a really warm welcome for our presenter, Richard.
Thank you, Charlene, for that introduction. I'm really happy to see all of you here today, and I know some of us may be a little nervous about everything that we're hearing about in the news related to vaping. I just want to make a distinction between the vaping outbreak and the vaping epidemic that is going on with our young people in schools. So sometimes you'll see them a little mixed, but what I'm going to be covering today are all the basics related to vaping and how young people are being targeted and manipulated by the industry. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to check in with all of you. So what I want to do is I want to check the temperature of the room to see how much we already know about e-cigarettes and vaping. Also, I want to cover all the information in this format tonight. So what I want to start with is talking about the device and what kind of device I'm talking about when I'm referring to an e-cigarette. Also, we need to talk about the aerosol. So that's something that is produced from the device that we breathe in. And the problem is the aerosol is not good for you. So I want to make that point clear tonight. And then you're probably wondering, if this aerosol is not good, why are people breathing this in still? And it's because the nicotine. So I need to talk about how these devices are addictive and how they're addicting young people quickly. And then what I'll talk to you about is how the industry is using particular messaging to make young people or turn them on to these devices. So a lot of people that we know who maybe start with some of these devices with the flavors, the companies do that on purpose. They want young people to start using them. And I'll explain why it's beneficial for them to have young people use their products. And then lastly, I'm going to share with you some resources. So if you know someone in your life who's trying to quit, a young person, I'll share with you some resources. And I am part of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit team, so I'll share with you our website information. That way you can look into this more. So what I want to do is I want to read this statement to all of you, and I want us to stand up if we think this is a fact, or stay seated if we believe this is an opinion. And I know we're all coming from different backgrounds today, so it's okay if you don't know a lot. I just want to see what your guess is. So the first statement we're reading here is, we don't know the long-term effects of using e-cigarettes/vapes. If you think that's true, I want you to stand up. Okay, so this is actually a fact. And the reason why this is the case is because it took us about 25 to 30 years to study the long-term effects of using cigarettes. So we don't have that information. It's going to take a long time for people to be using these products for us to know the long-term effects of using and how it's going to affect your heart, your lungs, and other parts of your body, including your brain. So when someone asks you, why is this vaping outbreak occurring? Why are people in the hospital? You may hear some information about it, but we don't have any clear conclusion as to what's causing these illnesses. We need to study that in more detail in order for us to know all of the harms associated with these products. Here's another one for all of you. E-cigarettes/vapes are safer than cigarettes. So if you think that statement is true, I want you to stand up. Now you're probably wondering, where did this come from? Have you heard this before? Well, the companies such as Juul Labs or other pod-based companies, and if you don't know those words, don't worry, I'm going to explain them tonight. But the companies want to give young people the impression, and even the public, the idea that these products are safer. But we know that's not true. As I was mentioning to you, you in the previous slide, we don't know what the long-term health effects are of using e-cigarettes. So it's really important for young people to understand and for you to understand that these products are not harmless. They do damage to your body. We just don't know what the long-term effects are going to look like. Okay, here's one more. I know it's a lot of words, but I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So 1 minute of cannabis secondhand smoke, so that's marijuana, exposure is enough to cause drastic reduction in blood vessel function, that's just your blood in your body, for at least 90 minutes. So if you think marijuana, breathing in some marijuana smoke can affect your blood system for 90 minutes, if you think that's true, I want you to stand up right now. So this is actually a fact, and some of you are probably wondering, where did you get that from? How do you know that? Well, some of our researchers in the Bay Area at University of California at San Francisco just found out some more information about secondhand smoke from marijuana or cannabis. And I'll be talking a little bit about how young people are using these e-cigarette devices to deliver marijuana into their system. So even though the focus will not be on cannabis tonight, it'll be on tobacco, I will still say a few things because I think it's important for us adults to know about different delivery systems and what are they delivering. Now, all the slides you're going to see tonight, most of them come from our Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. So that is the team I work for at Stanford University in the School of Medicine. So we're going to be sending out the link, but you'll notice a lot of these slides are online, and hopefully educators can use these, or if you're interested in learning more, everything that I'm saying, a lot of the words that I'm sharing with you are found on our website and our teacher talking points. So let's start with talking about the device, because when I started doing this work, I was beginning to notice that a lot of the devices look like everyday tech items. So what I'm holding right here is a clicker, but sometimes the e-cigarettes look like this. So if I were to do a presentation, you would think, oh, it's just a clicker, but this could also be an e-cigarette. It's starting to look a lot different from cigarettes and other type of tobacco products. So this is just a very simple representation of an e-cigarette. This is what sort of the first version looked like. So there were some universal components, and a lot hasn't changed. You'll still see it with the newer products. But what you'll find in an e-cigarette is a battery, and the battery will heat up a piece of metal or a coil, sometimes referred to as an atomizer. And what that does is it'll heat up the e-juice or e-liquid. So some of the terms I'm using tonight are used interchangeably. So young people will say e-juice, e-liquid, juice, liquid. All those terms mean the same thing. But what's happening in this device is you are heating up an e-juice and you are producing a nicotine aerosol. So I want you all to remember that word aerosol because I'm going to be explaining the difference between aerosol and vapor. It's really important to understand. So I want you to be up to speed with where we're at with the newer products because this probably hit the scene in 2008 and now we're having to deal with products that look more like this, what I'm holding with this clicker, and flash drives and other type of everyday tech products. So the first generation looked like a cigarette and it was disposable. So this was one way of thinking about these earlier devices. And then the second generation looked like a pen. So that's why we sometimes hear the word vape pen. So someone may say, oh, do you have your vape pen or do you have your wax pen? What they're referring to is they're referring to an e-cigarette that looks like a pen. But the problem with this language is that it makes someone think that it's just a safe product. Like, oh, a vape pen. Vape reminds me of vapor, which is just like water vapor. And pen reminds me of something we always write with. So the problem with some of the language that we see from the industry is that it can give us the impression that it's safe to use, when we know that's not the case. With the third generation, you'll see that they're a lot bigger. This is what I refer to as a mod system. And they focused on being refillable and customizable. So a lot of people who are using this generation of e-cigarettes were playing around with the coil, playing around with the battery power. That was really the focus for this generation of e-cigarettes. And this is where we're at right now with these newer pod-based devices. And like I said, if there's something that's not clear, I'll try my best to explain it. So I'll tell you why we call these pod-based devices. But these are sleek, discreet, they have a very high-tech appearance, something like this, what I'm holding. And they're also high in nicotine. So I want you all to remember that because I'm going to explain how much nicotine is actually in these products. Now, this image right here just paints a picture. It gives you a few other examples of what you should be looking out for, because if you're suspicious of someone in your life who's young and using these products, here are just a few and what they may look like. So you'll notice from first glance that this doesn't look like a tobacco nicotine product. And the companies were really smart about doing that because they wanted people to be able to get their nicotine buzz without anyone really noticing or being alarmed by the smell or the appearance of the actual device. Remember that image I went over earlier when I was showing you the anatomy of an e-cigarette? That was the very first e-cigarette that they designed. This is where we're at right now with dealing with products like Juul and Vapes. So what I want to walk you through is these components of a pod-based e-cigarette. So you'll notice there's still the part with the battery, and then there is this other smaller piece, and you saw in the video how small those pieces or cartridges were. So sometimes they'll be referred to as a cartridge or pod, and that's why we call them pod-based systems or pod-based e-cigarettes. A lot of these cartridges and pods come in an array of colors and flavors. The reason why is so that they can attract young customers. The companies did that on purpose. We have the science to back that up. We've done countless of surveys, and young people will tell you that they think these flavors are for them. So that's been a huge issue with these newer devices, or all the different flavors. Now, real quick, this note you'll see up here, I just want to remind you that if you see a pod-based e-cigarette, there's a really high chance that there is nicotine in there. So don't let someone fool you and say, hey, I'm not using one with nicotine. Even if they tell you that, you have to tell them that the aerosol is not good for you to breathe in. And I'll show you all of the different ingredients that you'd find in an aerosol. But this is just a slide to kind of identify all the different parts of these newer e-cigarettes. This is part of a study that we did at Stanford University. So even though this value is not showing up, don't worry about the numbers. I just want you to see that when we asked young people, about 200, what their first e-cigarette was that they ever used, a majority of them said that they were using a pod-based e-cigarette. So if you're not convinced that a lot of young people are starting with a pod-based e-cigarette, we have the data right here to back that up. Now, remember when I was showing you that timeline of devices? We went from the first generation to the second, to the third, to pod-based e-cigarettes. I want to compare the mod system versus the pod system. So this is a Juul device, a pod-based e-cigarette, and what you're seeing right here is a mod system, a lot bigger, and you may not see a young person use this one because it's so big and adults would catch them right away using it. But what happened with this pod-based e-cigarette is Juul Labs was able to revolutionize e-cigarette usage because they introduced something called salt-based nicotine. Now, I don't want to get into all the details, but let me just tell you that salt-based nicotine reduces the harshness on the throat of someone breathing in that aerosol. So if I'm a young person, I'm 16 years old, and I'm picking up something like this, like an e-cigarette, even though we know it's not, and I'm breathing in the aerosol for the first time, usually the aerosol, because it has a lot of nicotine, would turn someone off, and it also has other chemicals in there. So the salt-based nicotine, what it does is if someone's breathing that in for the first time, it doesn't hurt your throat as much. And the companies wanted the aerosol to be like that, so that young people could be turned onto the device a lot easier. So I will explain that concept a little later, but I just want you to remember that, the salt-based nicotine, and how it differs from this older type of nicotine called free-based nicotine. So the only difference between those two is that it reduces the harshness of the hit on your throat. And the companies were really smart about engineering their device that way. Another point is the nicotine amount. So Juul and other types of pod-based e-cigarettes have been able to deliver a lot more nicotine. And think about it, if it's easier for someone to breathe in an aerosol, then as a company, if you can deliver nicotine, more nicotine. So if you deliver more nicotine to someone's brain, guess what? Their chances of becoming addicted are a lot easier. So the companies with that salt-based nicotine have been able to deliver more nicotine. Now, if you were to compare something like this, a mod system to a pod system, look how much more nicotine a pod system has, such as Juul. 41.3 versus 25 milligrams of nicotine. I just want to give you an idea of the difference between those numbers. 25 milligrams of nicotine is something a very experienced cigarette smoker would use. So you have young people who have never smoked or used nicotine, and they're starting to use devices with 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. It is a lot and has a high potential for addiction. So the way to think about it is a Juul pod has 0.7 milliliters. It's a very small amount of liquid in there. And if you were to go to a vape shop and buy the most concentrated free-based nicotine, you would get about 25 milligrams per 0.7 milliliters. So if what I'm saying is, sounds foreign in any way, it's because the way we did this at Stanford was we tried to make it describe it in a way so you could understand that if you were to go to a vape shop, how much nicotine can you get of freebase? Main takeaway is Juul has a lot more nicotine from the older devices. I will show you a great slide that compares the amount of nicotine to a pack of cigarettes. So I know a lot of adults in this room, we're all familiar with a pack of cigarettes, or we know that it's 20 cigarettes per pack. So I'll explain to you in a later slide how much nicotine that is. Great question. And the other part I want to mention about this slide is that these new pod-based e-cigarettes, they're meant to be disposable, so these were made to be not to be refilled. But what I can tell you is that there are videos of young people who are saying, oh, I reuse my cartridges or pods. And I'm telling all of you in here because if you ever see one of those, it's fair to assume that there's anything in there. And we don't know where this person got it from. We don't know if there is marijuana in this pod. Remember, I was telling you that it is used to also deliver marijuana. So we have to be very suspicious when we see these small cartridges or pods. And then lastly, these mod systems or older devices really focused on being refillable and customizable. So I just want to remind you of how things have changed. Now, if I were to take apart a device, this is what it would look like. This is a Juul. And I have all these question marks here because I don't know how all of these parts are going to affect someone's health over time. I like to ask young people, what do you think the consequences are of using this? How is it going to affect your body and your community? And the reason why I'm using the word community is because we know a lot of this is being left behind as waste. And these plastic pieces, these metal pieces, they don't break down easily in the environment. So if you're thinking about Juul, there's a lot of evidence of there being e-cigarette waste. They just did a study in the Bay Area, and they found out that there's a lot of e-cigarette usage going on at certain schools, and all of those pieces, those cartridges, our pods are being left behind. And it's not good for the environment. Nicotine in those pods, nicotine is toxic, and it's not good for anything or anyone that's going to be exposed to it. And I'll talk more about nicotine soon. When I mention Vicks, Juul, some of these brand names of e-cigarettes, I just want you to know that I'm including every type of e-cigarette. So on this picture, you're just seeing a few examples of that, and I've been showing you pictures of the different types of devices. Okay, so let's talk about the aerosol because I have a quick demonstration to show you the difference between a water vapor and an aerosol. A lot of the times when we're reading articles or if someone's talking about it, they say, hey, are you going to that vaping parent talk? Did you hear about the vapor being released from the devices and how bad it's for you? So the companies were really smart when they decided to use the term vapor. This is a water vapor, okay? And this is a quick activity you can do with middle schoolers or high schoolers to show the difference between an aerosol and a vapor. This is an aerosol, but notice that the two look very similar. But we know that an aerosol, if you were to read on the back of this, is a list or a mixture of chemicals. So the reason why the industry used the word vapor is they wanted to give people the idea that it was safe for you. That, oh, when I use my e-cigarette, I'm breathing in this. It's just harmless water vapor. That's not the reality. You need to know that this is an aerosol. It's something more like this. And imagine, if you're breathing in something like this, those chemicals, they're going to be left behind in your lungs. And your lungs cannot break down complex chemicals. So the only thing we should be breathing in is clean air, and then we should be expelling carbon dioxide from our metabolism in our body. But basically, it's not good for you to breathe in aerosol. And I want everyone to be clear about that, because a lot of the times the companies will say, oh, the vapor is better than breathing in cigarette smoke. No, smoke is smoke, aerosol smoke, it's not good for you. Some of the articles that we may see online, a lot of them are showing how these devices are not good for your health. So we know that there's residue being left behind in people's lungs, and that residue is doing damage to your lungs. So the aerosol is not good for your lungs. It's also increasing your risk for cardiovascular or heart disease. So a lot more studies are coming out. I probably see like at least one study a month on the negative effects on someone's heart. So when someone's breathing in that aerosol, it is not good for your heart and your blood system. Also, if you think about your upper body, so your nasal pathway, that's your nose, your ear, your throat, when you're breathing in that aerosol, it's also doing damage to those parts of your body. So these are what I would call short-term effects, or something that you would probably notice right away, but we don't know if this is cancerous. We're starting to find out a little more about some of the chemicals that are cancerous, but we don't know what this is going to look like if you use it for 10 years, for 20 years. And then lastly, if you think about the brain, this aerosol is probably not good for your brain. And we know that a young person's brain in particular is trying to do its job with development, and you have all these chemicals now trying to come in and interfere with that. So we need to study that more, because the companies won't tell you what the long-term effects are of the aerosol in the brain. So just a few headliners that we may have seen that we're familiar with, but I just want to share with you. E-cigarettes can damage DNA. That's what can cause cancer. If you're damaging parts of your cells, then what happens is you can increase your risk for cancer. So this is what they are finding out about this aerosol. Now, what I think of the aerosol are the process of producing the smoke. You can say aerosolization or aerosolizing. But remember when I told you earlier that these devices are not just delivering nicotine, they're also delivering THC from cannabis, or sometimes we say the word marijuana, but THC is the active ingredient in cannabis, so that's what causes someone to be high. Now, I want to tell you this because this aerosol, even if someone says, oh, I'm only using a vape device with marijuana, that's better than nicotine, you can tell them that aerosol is not good for you to breathe in. And here are just a few points of how this can affect you. If someone were to aerosolize some cannabis from a vape device, they would probably be high in about 5 to 10 seconds, so they would feel it immediately. Also, it would last, depending on how much THC is in there, for 30 to several hours. So sometimes if you think, oh, my friend has this device, I just wanted to take a hit from it, oh, maybe there's marijuana or THC in there, and then now you're high, and if you're at school, it's going to obviously affect your performance in your classes. So I just want you to be clear that there are other things other than nicotine in these devices, and this is just a slide to show you that. Now, how many of us have heard of the term dabbing? And I'm not talking about the dance. So dabbing, a lot of adults, I have young people laughing over here because that's what some of us think when we first hear the term, like, oh, it's a dance, it's nothing like harmful. Well, dabs and wax, it's a very concentrated form of THC. So what the cannabis industry has done, and I'm not going to talk about them today, is they've been able to create newer products with way more THC than what the hippies were using in the 60s. So the hippies were using marijuana or weed that was probably around 5% THC. Now we're looking into something that's closer to 80% in terms of THC. So the THC wax, when someone's using that with a vape device, it's still producing an aerosol that you should not be breathing in. And a lot of the emergency room visits that we hear about are due to dabbing and edibles. So the problem here is dosing. If a young person starts to breathe in this THC, it can get them high really quick. And THC is a psychoactive drug, so it can make someone feel hallucinations or start to trip out if they've used too much. So this is something we have to think about when we're talking about e-cigarettes and vapes, because whenever I see a device, I think, well, there could be THC in there could be nicotine, there can be both, we just don't know. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to look at some of the chemicals we have found in cigarettes. Here's a list of chemicals that we know are released from cigarette smoke. Now, I want us to think about that list and wonder, okay, well, how many of the same chemicals can we find in an e-cigarette aerosol? And it shouldn't surprise you that those ingredients are actually the same ones are found in e-cigarette, vape pen aerosol. So when the companies try to tell you, oh, this is different, this is an alternative to smoking, I'm sorry to break it to you, but a lot of those chemicals, the same ones are released in e-cigarettes. And let me tell you this piece of information. They're finding out that there are new chemicals released from e-cigarettes that are not released from cigarettes, that do a lot of harm to your health. So I just want you to think about the long-term effects and us not knowing them for these newer tobacco products. You're probably wondering, okay, I saw all those names, what does that even mean? Can you explain it to me in everyday terms? So some of these chemicals we can find in items around us. So for example, lead can be found in car batteries. Nickel can be found in cheap jewelry. Toluene can be found in paint thinner. So I just want to give you an idea of where are these chemicals, how are they usually used with other products. Benzene in gasoline, cadmium with batteries, formaldehyde with tissue preserver, diacetyl with butter flavoring, and nicotine in tobacco. So if that other slide didn't resonate with you, or you thought, okay, I don't know what those chemicals are, these are the types of chemicals that these companies are using. And guess what? They don't care, because as long as they're making their money, they don't have to worry about people coming after them. If they have all that money, they have a lot of power, and they can actually influence what we think about these devices. So the industry or the companies, when I say the word big tobacco, for some of us, we're hearing that for the first time. Big tobacco means all those big companies like Marlboro and Camel, all those companies that sell tobacco or nicotine products, okay? So it's referring to the industry. And if we're not familiar with that, I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about it. Now, some of you are like, that's great, Richard. You're talking about cigarettes. You're talking about e-cigarette devices. What about a Juul? Juul doesn't have that many ingredients in it. So if you went onto their website, you would see that these ingredients are listed. Nicotine, benzoic acid, propylene glycol, glycerol, natural oils, extracts and flavors. And then I have some question marks because remember I've been talking about aerosolizing something, or heating it up and producing chemicals in a gas form. So the company is not telling you what happens when you heat this up. What is in the aerosol? Well, guess what? Let me tell you this. A lab did some research and they identified 59 chemicals in a Juul pod e-juice. That's a very different story from what they have on their website, what we see with those big words right there. So 59 chemicals that they found in this e-juice. It's not even, we're not even getting to the point of what's in the aerosol. But what I can tell you is that these chemicals in red are known to be hazardous, toxic, are toxic, can do damage to the environment. They are not good for you. And if someone's using 1 pod a day, 1 pod a week, imagine all the chemicals that they're being exposed to by breathing it in. Now, the ones in orange aren't as toxic, but they're still not good for your health. They can do harm to your body. And then lastly, the ones in blue that we're seeing that are a little faint, those are irritants. But guess what? If you continue to expose irritants to your body, certain parts of your body can become inflamed, are irritated, hence the name. So I just want us to think about what the companies are not telling us and how that benefits them. To get to your question earlier, when we're thinking about the amount of nicotine, it's closer to 1.5 to 2 packs of cigarettes. And I'll explain to you how we did our math at Stanford, if that's not clear. Now, you're wondering, what if someone's using this and you're not using it? Well, you can still be exposed to some of these chemicals in the aerosol. So obviously, there is nicotine in the aerosol, but there are also heavy metals. So remember, a device that looks like this, looks like a tech product, has a battery in there. It has metals, it has a coil. When it's being heated up, some of those chemicals get into the e-juice, and then they're released in the aerosol. So that's what's happening right here. Some of the other ones we know about are ultra-fine particles. So what those are very tiny chemicals that can penetrate deep into your lungs. And what we know about the aerosol from e-cigarettes is that it's a lot smaller than smoke from cigarettes. So if an aerosol or smoke is smaller, what it means is it can go deeper into your lungs. And if it goes deeper into your lungs, it can do more damage to your lungs. Now, some of the other ones I want to mention there are cancerous chemicals that are released in the aerosol. And then this last one, VOCs, that's just volatile organic compounds. But your main takeaway is it's not good to be exposed to the secondhand aerosol. What if I told you there was another term referring to the aerosol that interacts with the environment? So I'm talking about the floor, I'm talking about the wall, I'm talking about your clothes. The third-hand aerosol from some of these devices, they leave behind a residue, just like they leave behind a residue in your lungs if you're breathing this in. So that residue is harmful. It can be harmful to your younger sibling, your pet. And what's happening with the third-hand aerosol is that those chemicals are interacting and being left behind on the floor, on the wall, with your clothes. So a way to think about it is if I went into someone's house who was using maybe cigarettes or e-cigarettes, and let's just say I took down one of their picture frames, there would probably be an outline on their wall. So the reason why everything behind the picture is light and everything on the wall is darker is because of that third-hand aerosol. It is probably interacting with the wall and creating that stain. So like I said, why are young people continuing to breathe in the aerosol? I go and talk to young people, middle schoolers, high schoolers all the time, and the thing is, the nicotine is really causing people to go back and use the device. So even if someone knows it's bad for them, once you're addicted to nicotine, your brain doesn't care what it's seen in a lecture. It wants to get that nicotine because your brain thinks it's important for survival. So at that point, you don't have control over your brain anymore. Nicotine has hijacked it. So when we're thinking about nicotine, I think this would be a good time to check in with all of you. I know we've been covering a lot of information. Do we have any questions before we talk about nicotine? Yes, right there.
So in one of those pods, how many puffs or vapes do you get out of it?
So the problem is we don't know how to measure puffs or anything like that, but for like a Juul pod, it contains about 200 puffs. And that's coming from the company. That's the best source.
So you have to breathe 200 times to get to 41.3 milligrams of nicotine?
Yes, in theory. We just don't know.
Not each puff, 41.3.
Well, what if someone's holding the device for a long time?
No, I'm just asking.
Then you're getting more than one puff.
No, but is it per puff, 41.3,
Per puff, you're probably going, so the way I like to think about it is for every 5 puffs, you're getting about a cigarette's worth of nicotine.
Thank you.
Yes. I know, we'll go over a slide a little later that shows you how much it equals in terms of nicotine. The concept itself, though, is not clear, but don't worry, the companies want us to be confused. They're not going to tell you how dangerous each puff is, or, oh, you should only use this amount before you develop cancer, or before your heart starts feeling this way. So I just want you to know that they don't really care about your health, especially young people. Are there any other questions, though, about the aerosol or the device itself?
I'm curious, what is the FDA doing about this?
So the question is, what is the FDA? If you don't know what that is the Food and Drug Administration. They are basically in charge of making sure that we have safe products on the market or in our stores. So the FDA has been behind with making sure that these products are regulated. So these e-cigarettes should have never made it onto the market. The way they were able to sell these devices, Big Tobacco, was that they found loopholes or flaws in our system, or what usually regulates cigarettes. So they thought, oh, cigarettes are already regulated this way, but if we change it a little bit, it's not going to apply to e-cigarettes. So the FDA is not really doing much. We may hear it a lot of times like, oh, the government's going to ban flavors. Well, I think our best bet is if we ban flavors in our city, because guess what? The federal government doesn't move that fast. And it's been a huge problem with the work we do. Are there any other questions? Yes, in the back.
So how, I hear the kids can do this in the classroom or in PE or just on campus, but I understand that when you use it, it makes a way through the smoke?
Not always. So if I were to use a pod-based e-cigarette like this, I could, let's just say I'm a young person, I'm breathing this in. I could blow it into my shirt, sometimes called ghosting, and the reason why young people can get away with that is because the stench from the aerosol from these newer devices, they're not as strong as cigarette smoke. So that's why we're seeing young people use them in the class, in between classes, during PE, while walking home, and we don't really smell it right away. It's not as strong or as thick, but also the aerosol from these newer e-cigarettes, some of them smell fruity or flavorful, and that doesn't really alarm us at all. You may sometimes be walking around at the mall, and then you may pass an aerosol cloud and think, that doesn't smell bad. I wonder if that's a perfume or something else. So the companies were really smart. They wanted the aerosols to not be too stinky or for them to alarm adults. Great question, though. Any other questions before we talk about nicotine? I know some of us are curious or eager to learn more about this. Okay, so remember, the aerosol, you should not be breathing in any aerosol, okay? The nicotine in these devices, it's highly addictive. So nicotine, like I say all the time, is one of the most addictive chemicals on this planet. Where do they get it from? They get it from the tobacco plant. And the tobacco plant, nicotine is a pesticide or an insecticide. So what that means is it's supposed to kill off insects that are trying to attack the plant. So just think about that. Think about nicotine and how it came to exist in the tobacco plant. Now, what we know about brain development and just the brain in general is that it can change your brain chemistry. And I'll explain to you how that happens. It can alter your normal brain function. So remember earlier when I was telling you that you think it's important for survival, nicotine is doing things in your brain to start telling you that oh, I need nicotine to survive. Oh, I just woke up in the morning, where's my Juul? Where's my Fix? Where's my Soren? I need my device. So nicotine has that ability to teach your brain to chase that buzz or that nicotine hit. Also, the reason why this is happening is because it hijacks a part of your brain called the reward pathway. It produces something called dopamine in the reward pathway in your brain. The reason why dopamine is so important, I don't want to get into the details, is because dopamine is your pleasure chemical. When you eat food, you get a release of dopamine. When you go work out, you get a release of dopamine. Those are all natural ways of releasing dopamine. When you breathe in something with nicotine, you get a huge amount of dopamine. The only problem is it's not natural. So once your brain feels it, it thinks, oh, I need to keep getting that nicotine to feel good about myself. And we know that during development, with the brain development, when you're a young person, you need to figure out what fires off dopamine naturally. If you don't do that, as you get older in life, it's a lot harder to find out what fires off dopamine for you. And then lastly, what happens is if you use a lot of nicotine, what will happen is your levels will start to drop in your brain, and then you'll start to develop a craving. And if you don't have that nicotine, you start to have a withdrawal. So think about it this way. If I'm using nicotine all the time, my brain starts to say, oh, this is the only way I can feel pleasure if I'm using nicotine. And guess what? When you're not using it, your brain freaks out, and that's when you have withdrawal symptoms. Because now your brain thinks that's the best source for feeling good about yourself, when we know it's not the case. Okay, just a few other ways that I want to talk about of how nicotine can affect you. So we know that it can slow learning development, memory, and attention, which is critical to being a young person and a student. You have to think about being in middle school, high school, and when you go into college, you need your brain to be in its best form. So nicotine is not going to help you in that sense. Also, there are associated mood disorders with using a lot of nicotine. So someone may describe being anxious if they're not able to get their nicotine hit, or also depressed if they're not using enough of it. And it can also lower your impulse control. So you may have a harder time controlling things that, other things that you're craving when you start to use a lot of nicotine. And lastly, what it does is, and I want to make this point, emphasize this point. If you know someone in your family, or if you know grandparents or great-grandparents who are addicted to something, if addiction runs in your family, guess what? The chances of you using nicotine and liking it are pretty high. So when someone asks me, well, I tried it, I didn't really like it, and I'm thinking, well, your brain probably isn't prone to addiction as much. So in your family, you're probably not likely to like nicotine or other drugs. But if someone uses nicotine, what it'll do is it gets the brain interested in other drugs. So I just want you to know that for a lot of brains, especially young brains, it's easy for that to happen. It's even easier for it to happen if you have addiction in your family. If there's history of someone being addicted to alcohol, someone being addicted to cannabis, or some other drug. So I just want to make that point clear, is that everyone's brain is different, but you can start to see patterns in your family, or in your genes. That's another way to think of it. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what if I'm a young person, I'm curious, and we know the aerosol's not good for you, the nicotine's not good for you, and let me have this be the takeaway point, is for brain development. Your brain doesn't stop developing until about the age of 25. So you want to make sure the brain's doing its job up to that point, but if nicotine is introduced before that, your chances of becoming addicted to nicotine are a lot higher than someone like me. If someone is 16 and picking up nicotine for the first time, their chances of becoming addicted are so high. If someone like me who's 28 is picking up a device and using it for the first time, I'm probably not going to become addicted because my brain development is already finished for the most part. Okay, so I don't want to bore you with the science because I know there's a lot of other great information here, but for some of you who are interested in this, I just want you to see that nicotine in the orange right there. Let me replay that. It looks like a chemical our brain already produces. So that's how it's able to teach you that it's important for survival. Because you already have chemicals in your brain, and once nicotine is in your brain, it starts to behave like those chemicals. So the main point is pleasure is being stimulated in someone's brain. It's in a ridiculous amount, and it's not natural for a young person's brain to feel that. The other way of imagining this is, think about termites, and termites being in a house. They start to take over the house's structure. That's what nicotine does. Nicotine is behaving like those termites, and your house, your brain can be affected by that. Now, some of you may have seen the packaging in the stores. This is when Juul and other products similar to it came out on the market. So when I look at this, I ask myself, 5% strength of what, and how much is 5%? Because I've been talking about 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. That sounds very different than what we're seeing on this box right here. So I have a note, and it says they want you to be confused. It benefits these companies to put out something like this that makes you think it's safe. Oh, it only has a few ingredients. Oh, it produces a water vapor. Oh, it looks like an Apple product. Everything seems fine. Well, guess what? That 41.3 milligrams of nicotine is very addictive, and it can hijack your brain. So we've done some studies at our university, and we have found out that young people, when we ask them how much nicotine is in a Juul or in these other pod-based e-cigarettes, look how everything is falling on this table. We're looking at sort of mixed responses. Oh, I think it's this much. I think it's 5 milligrams per milliliter. I think it's 59. The reason why it's like this is because the companies are not clear about how much nicotine is in there and what that means for your brain and your body. Here is the slide I've been waiting for, because I think it does a really good job at showing you how much nicotine can be found in these cartridges or pods. So remember I told you a pack of cigarettes, there are 20 cigarettes per 1 pack of cigarettes. And the way I want you to think about nicotine delivery in a cigarette pack is if someone were to use 1 cigarette, if it had 8 milligrams or if it had 12 milligrams, what we know is on average, you're only taking in 1 milligram per cigarette. So 1 cigarette is 1 milligram of nicotine, okay? So 1 pack, 20 milligrams of nicotine. Let's do some math. If I told you a Juul contains 41.3 milligrams of nicotine, that means it's closer to about 41 cigarettes, or what we say 1.5 to 2 packs. The reason we use that range is because some people's bodies are different. So they may take in more nicotine, they may take in less. But the companies will tell you, and we've seen other campaigns, that it's a pack of cigarettes in terms of nicotine. But us at Stanford, we like to think of it as being closer to 41 cigarettes. So imagine you're seeing something this small and you're not even imagining or thinking that it can deliver that much nicotine. But that's what we're finding out when we're doing this research at Stanford. Now, a fixed pod, which is bigger, so it has more e-juice, can deliver up to 75 cigarettes worth of nicotine. Lastly, a Soren pod, and this is one someone would have to fill on their own, but if they were to use something with a high amount of salt-based nicotine, it would be closer to 90 cigarettes. So I just want you to see how these compare to cigarettes, because they may seem small, but there's a high potential for addiction here. And that's something that companies don't care to tell you. They don't care to tell you how likely you are to become addicted when you use 1 pod. Now, how different is this from a cigarette? We know that the cigarette was engineered or designed to be as addictive as possible and to deliver nicotine in the most non-invasive way. So in other words, they want people to use it and not be turned off by it. And what you're seeing is that in the cigarette, companies have purposely increased the amount of nicotine in there. They have introduced flavors like menthol, so it reduces the harshness on the throat, very similar to what I've talked about with salt-based nicotine. And then they've added flavors, ammonia compounds, bronchodilators, and also sugars and acetaldehydes. But all these ingredients are making it easier for someone to use. And once someone uses this and becomes addicted, they want to continue to do that. Now, I can tell you that Juul is sort of the future of cigarettes. So I think of it as cigarette 2.0. And that's why you'll see big companies invest in Juul labs, because they see them as sort of the future of nicotine delivery. But guess what? Juul didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They just used all the different strategies that the other cigarette companies use to create their product. Remember when I was telling you about the throat hit? So salt-based nicotine reduces the harshness on the throat. A throat hit, though, is your body's way of saying, hey, I shouldn't be breathing in this aerosol or this smoke. The companies tell you all the time that we designed this for adult smokers who are trying to quit cigarettes. The only problem is that if they wanted to design this for adults, they would have kept the throat hit. But guess what? They didn't, because they wanted to attract young people. They wanted to attract people who had never used nicotine before. So that's why they introduced something like salt-based nicotine. An example I like using real quick is if someone were to pick up a can of soda, imagine they put more sugar in your drink, but you didn't know about it because they have some crazy formula, and when you drank it, you didn't know how much sugar you were getting. That's exactly what Juul did with their salt-based nicotine. You're using the e-cigarette and you don't know how much nicotine you're receiving. I want to go through this quickly, but if some of you are wondering how quickly does it take for someone to go through a cartridge or pod, we have found from our research that the ones who remember their usage have identified it as being 7 days. That's the most common amount of time that it takes a young person to get through a cartridge or pod. If they're sharing it with other people, it may be quicker, but this is just some research that we have at Stanford. Now, there are ways that nicotine affect the body other than rewiring and changing the brain. The other way it can impact someone's heart is by putting it in a very excited state or fight or flight mode. So fight or flight mode is used for us to respond to a dangerous situation. We either need to get ready to run or we need to get ready to fight. It can be beneficial in the short term, but if your body always thinks it's in a fight or flight mode, it can be very stressful on your whole system. So we know that nicotine does that, and it's not good for your heart because it puts it in this excited state. Also, nicotine can cause trouble breathing and also damage to the lungs. So remember I was talking about residue from the aerosol? Nicotine can do that to your lungs as well. It can do damage to that organ. And then lastly, nicotine itself can increase your acid reflux. So there are many different ways that someone will respond to using nicotine right away. Some of you are probably wondering, how do I know if a young person around me is using? Here are just a few indicators of someone maybe being addicted to nicotine. So you may notice some changes in clothing. And I know some of these probably sound like, okay, this is what we notice from, being a teenager. We go through these things, but there are just some particular ones I want to point out. So any changes in school performance, any moodiness or irritability. Like I said earlier, you can have withdrawal symptoms if you're using a lot of nicotine and then you stop. So someone can respond to that. Your brain starts to freak out because it thinks it needs it to survive. So it will do anything it can to get that nicotine. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the messaging or the targeting that goes on, because a lot of young people we know are using for some of these reasons right here. And guess what? The industry, the companies know this too. So they know that young people starve because of the flavors, and we know that from the research. We also know that things are changing socially, so you may see a video online of someone using and you may be interested in checking it out, or you see them doing tricks with their e-cigarette aerosol and you want to do those tricks as well. Life stressors. Young people tell us all the time that they're using because they're stressed, they're anxious, they're depressed. That is real to feel that way, but you cannot cope with the world by using nicotine. Your brain needs to figure out how to cope, and it's not through using drugs or nicotine. That's not going to be a good coping skill to learn. Also, if you think about young people, because of brain development, you're waiting for your prefrontal cortex to hurry up. So if you're waiting for your prefrontal cortex or your part of your brain to finish developing, you may not be able to assess the situation the best. So you're probably looking at something and thinking, is this risky? Is it not risky? This kind of seems weird, I don't know. So that's happening because you're waiting for your brain to hurry up and finish up with the prefrontal cortex. And you may look at something and think it's not as dangerous or harmful. The companies make it easier, though, to make it seem harmless, because like we saw with the packaging and their messaging, they even make an adult think that it's okay to use when we know it's not safe. Also, the marketing and lack of addiction education, which I've provided a little of today, but the ones I want to focus on are Flavours, changing social norms, and marketing. So when I'm talking about the Flavours, we know that they have a kids menu. When you think about all the different flavors on the market that you can find if you were to go online. And what we know are there are over 15,500 different flavors. And if you look at some of these names right here, they're pretty entertaining, and they just make you think, why would an adult want to use something like that? They're clearly targeting young people and their interests. The other part of this story is that maybe a young person will start using because of the flavors, and then they may not realize that those individual flavors have their own health consequences. So here are just some recent studies that have looked at how flavors can impair your lung function and increase your risk for heart disease. So the flavors are not only being used to turn young people onto the device, they also have their health harms associated. And we need to make sure to include that when we're talking about the flavors. Real quick, this is just looking at other e-juices, so don't worry about everything you're seeing. I just want you to take away from this slide that young people are not just using the same e-juice from like Juul or from Soren. They're buying knockoff e-juices or cartridges or pods. And that's scary because we don't know what chemicals are in there. Remember when I was showing you that slide of the Juul pod? Those are some of the ingredients we know, but we don't know all the other ingredients for different types of e-juices. Okay, let me start this over. This is just the initial campaign when Juul Labs came out on the scene. This is what they wanted the public to see. If I'm a company and I'm telling you, oh, I designed a product to get people off cigarette smoking, those who've been smoking for like 10 to 20 years, does that look like that group of people who've been smoking for 20 years? No, some of the models are probably barely 20 years old, or they don't even look like they're over 20. So the problem is, Juul Labs will say, oh, and they've reached out to us too at Stanford and have said, oh, well, this was our 2015 campaign. We don't have anything like that anymore. But I tell them, you've already, we've responded with the lawyers at Stanford by saying, you've already kind of done the damage in a lot of ways. So even if you're saying it's for adults, this is who you were trying to attract initially. And if we think about other pod-based e-cigarettes, they're trying to reach as many people as possible. So they want to reach out to other ethnic groups. They want someone young to see a model and think, oh, this looks like me, or this feels like someone I know, so maybe I should try this, or it's okay to try. The problem with this ad that we're seeing right here is this model looks like someone from last year who was involved in the Parkland shooting. Does anyone know who this model looks like? She spoke out against gun. Emma Gonzalez, yes, thank you. So when I'm speaking to a group of people, there's at least one person that will say that looks like Emma Gonzalez. And the reason why that's important is because these companies are piggybacking on issues that are relevant to young people. Look at the language when they say, this is the vape you've been waiting for. We know that our youth are waiting for change with our government, with our system, and they're using that language to entice them, to make them seem like, oh, us companies, we care about you. We care about the issues that you care about. When we know they don't. That's not the case. Some of you will probably tell me, especially young people in the room, like, I have never seen those ads. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you don't have to go too far online to find certain targeting on social media. So we know that young people connect online and through social media, and we have found out that there were social media influencers. Those are people who go online and give reviews for certain products, and they get money from the companies. So we found out that Juul Labs, just one big company, paid people so that they could brag about their product and basically make it seem cool to young people. So here are just some examples if you were to go on social media and see someone using an e-cigarette, and maybe someone who's young and hip, and you may think, oh, well, this seems cool, maybe I should check it out. Well, guess what? The company paid this model right here, Christina, to have a link to their product so you can get a promotional deal, so you can get some money off of a product. And that's what they were doing when they first launched their company, because they thought, let's try to get young people in the best way we can through social media. Also, we're probably familiar at this point with memes. If you haven't heard of that, it's basically some image with some funny text, and it usually pokes at our culture of what we're used to seeing. But look at some of these memes right here. I'd rather lose my Juul than lose you. You have someone presenting a Juul in a jewelry box, and you also have this last one of someone in a desert walking towards Juul pods versus water, which is a quarter mile away. This is a clear sign of addiction. Now, us young people may know someone at our school who's addicted or is using a lot and think, oh, this is funny, this reminds me of so-and-so. Well, if you think about some of these messages, if you think about the dark side of it, it's really not funny for someone to be addicted or for someone's brain to say, oh, I need this for survival, when we know that you don't. But it's a problem because these companies have introduced these products, they didn't tell them what was in it, and then now you're using it because you're already addicted. But I just want us to think about how these messages can be harmful if they circulate online, and they may make us think that it's okay for someone to be using when we know it's not the case. A good question that I'm asked is, how are people, young people in particular, accessing these products? So here was a study that was done last year in 2018, and they found out that a majority of young people were picking them up in a store. So they were going into a store and no one was asking for their ID. Now we know you have to be 21 or older to purchase a tobacco nicotine product in the state of California. So imagine someone walking in and someone selling a Juul or Juul pods or other types of cartridges or e-juice to a young person. That's what young people are telling us. The other majority of access is through a social source. So you may know an older sibling who can access this. You may know a friend who sells it at school. That's what we're hearing. We're hearing a lot of stories of, okay, well, there's a demand at my school, so maybe I should sell them, and I'm going to sell them for a cheaper price, so that way they can access their nicotine. So you may not even be aware if there's something like that going on at your school, but this is what happens when you create a nicotine addiction or a vaping epidemic, is people want their nicotine out. Their brains have been hijacked. The connection I want to make is a lot of us in the room, for the adults, we know about cigarette companies and everything they've done to get people addicted, and we know some of these names: Newport, Marlboro, Camel. Well, guess what? They released e-cigarettes, but more importantly, they had their own form of a Juul, or pod-based e-cigarette. So they decided we need to come out with something because young people are using this and we want to make money from them. Well, the problem with that is we don't hear about that. The public doesn't know that these cigarette companies are making these e-cigarettes. So a lot of the times when Juul says, oh, we're an alternative company, we're not big tobacco, we believe that. But we have to remember that these people who are making money from cigarettes are the same people making money from e-cigarette sales. Some of the main points that I want to just revisit is that these products are designed to deliver as much nicotine. And the reason they are able to deliver more nicotine is because that salt-based nicotine formula, it's not as invasive or it's not as harsh on your throat. So now they're able to addict young people a lot easier with their new formula. But guess what? Their new formula, they didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It was what cigarette companies were already doing. The second point is that they introduced flavors as a way to make young people attracted to these devices. And there are also a list of other reasons how they encourage a young person to use. But we know that they downplay the harms of these flavors and all the other ingredients in the aerosol. And then lastly, their marketing strategies, they don't have any boundaries. They don't care who they're going to piss off. They have a lot of money and they can do this. The best part of them having a young person post something on social media is they don't have to pay someone to market for them. You're doing it. So if you know someone who's using and showing it online, you're marketing for these companies and you're doing their dirty work. Now, remember the statement that I was mentioning a few moments ago? That Juul Labs will say, oh, we're not big tobacco, we're alternative, we're different, we care about smokers and other people. This is something that they had on their social media. So Juul Labs is not big tobacco. But I think of it this way. Juul Labs is big tobacco because the makers of Marlboro cigarettes invested $12.8 billion in their company. And remember when I mentioned that this is cigarette 2.0? They see Juul and other pod-based e-cigarettes as the future of smoking. are the future of nicotine delivery. So just remember that these companies are involved with the sales of these newer products. It's not different at all. Okay, if you're trying to figure out some resources to use or just learning more about this, we have our Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. If you're an educator or someone who just wants to learn more about the slides that I presented, we have activities, educator crash courses, fact sheets. For those in the crowd who are Spanish speaking, we will be providing some of these fact sheets and other materials online very soon. So you'll be able to go online and learn more about what I've been talking about today. Also, if you are working at a school and you know young people are being caught for using or vaping, you can use this curriculum. It's designed for those who are caught, and it's an awareness session. So you know how I've been talking about all this today? Someone can do that for an hour, 2 hours, or longer as a way to inform that young person about all the harms of the aerosol, of the nicotine, and other parts of the device. Here are just ways of using the toolkit if you're interested. I'll provide the link to the slides so you can check this out. If you want to follow us on social media with all of the work that we do here and at Stanford and around the country, this is a great way to keep up. Now here's the important part. If you know a young person who is trying to quit, who needs support, who has approached you and said, hey, I'm tired of vaping, I don't like my brain thinking that it's important for survival, I need to quit, what are some resources? So you can immediately text Ditch Juul to 887-09. This is a Truth Initiative, evidence-based cessation program. Also, there is a line that someone could call, so this is another resource if you're interested. I believe this one's national, so if you know someone even out of state, they could use this number. And then California is great with tobacco prevention and control, so they also have other resources, so another phone line that you could use if you know a young person that wants to quit. Lastly, I know we have a lot of information delivered today, so we're probably going to process a little bit of it, and questions may come up as we see more in the news. If you want to reach out to me, please email me. That way we can stay in touch. It's really important that we come out and educate the public about these devices, but if there's something new going on in your community, please tell us so we can incorporate it and try to investigate or study it more. But we're going to answer any other questions you may have. I know it's a lot, but if there's anything that you want to know about e-cigarettes or vaping, please, this is your session. I want you to ask them. Yeah.
Wait, first of all, let's
Oh, yeah.
say